Are we up yet? Working. Okay. All right. So this is my first shot at driving this rig and sitting in the James Tiberius Kirk honorary chair. So we'll see how things go. Probably be a bumpy ride, but I think we'll get through. So I will officially open this meeting. It is 7:01. Today is June 20th, 2023. Get to the beginning here. And let me just read this little caveat. Pursuant to the council rules of procedure and 2022 Open Public Meetings Act update, the Monroe City Council meeting will be held in a hybrid format. Council members, staff and members of the public may participate in Monroe City Council meetings, both in person and remotely. And that being said, could we have the roll call, please?
Yes, thank you. Council members present and establishing a quorum are council members Fulcher, Kinney, Hanford, Davis, Fisher, and Scarborough. And for the record, planning commissioners present are Walker, Bull, Blair, Nugent, Lockhart, and Lewis. And commissioners Nugent and Lockhart are both attending virtually.
All right, thank you. Councilmember Gamble was on the docket today for the pledge, but he is not with us this evening. So Councilmember Kinney has volunteered to fill in for him. Councilman Kinney.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America.
Thank you, Councilmember. Public comments is now the next thing on the list here. If you're attending the meeting virtually, use the link or number provided above. Please indicate that you would like to speak by clicking raise hand, and I will call on the attendee to speak at the appropriate time. If you're joining by phone, dial 9 to raise your hand. Do we have anybody signed up for comments? No. Anybody on the
Line indicating they want to speak.
all right. That being said, then we'll move on to section 5, special order of business. Now we have, let me see. We have a need to change the council rules of procedure to allow final action at the meeting. This is technically a study session. And so we need to, we need an motion to do that. Now, what order do we need to do this? Is this just this one?
Motion first, and then we have one more motion after this for consent.
All right. So if I could have a motion. Councilmember Kinney.
I move to waive council rules of procedure section 6.1.c to allow for final action to be taken at a study session and to hold a business meeting and study session on Tuesday, June 20th, 2023.
Okay, we have a motion by Councilmember Kinney and a second by Councilmember Fulcher. All in favor, say aye. All opposed? The ayes have it. Then we have the next motion. We move right on to consent agenda. Okay, so moving on then to the consent agenda. Do we have a motion to approve consent agenda?
I move to approve the consent agenda as provided in the packet.
Okay, The motion is by Councilmember Fulcher, the second by Councilmember Hanford. All in favor? All opposed? Ayes have it. Moving on to section 7. All the way down to councilmember reports. Where do we want to start? Councilmember Scarborough?
Nothing to report.
Okay. Councilmember Fisher.
Went to take the next step, fundraiser. So last week before, I don't know, it was kind of.
Week and a half ago.
Jumbled together, a week and a half ago. It was awesome. Jerry did a great job and company. It was great to hear some of the success stories out of that. Also attended the 8th grade party, which was underneath the grandstand at the Speedway. Super awesome. Happened to have an 8th grader, was just there hanging out. Just to clear that up. And it was great. The parents that put it together did an amazing job. The kids were almost perfectly well behaved. Almost. There was just a couple, and it was not a big deal. We would just have to remind them that that's not what we do. And so it was great. There was probably 50 or 60 chaperones there. So there was a one chaperone. I think there was 250 students. So it was quite a party. It was great. And then this weekend I took a walk up above Galaxy Theater and Walmart up in that wooded area. Seems to be a little bit of a hot spot on social media lately. So kind of went up there and walked around. There's some garbage up there. I didn't grid the whole thing out. But walked around a good portion of it. There was no active camps up there at the time. Something to definitely keep an eye on that some of the folks up in that area are worried about. That's pretty much what I did, I think, so far. I'll probably run stuff later.
Thank you. Councilmember Hanford.
Thank you. Yeah, I attended the Take the Next Step luncheon. That was great to hear the reports and be able to support such a great organization. I also attended the public officials reception in Everett that the Economic Alliance of Snohomish County put on, and got to hear from several different representatives, legislators, giving a report on what happened in Olympia and where we're at. So it's very good. That's it. Thanks.
Thank you. Councilmember Kinney.
No report tonight. Thank you.
Councilmember Fulcher.
Some of the same things that other people went to, the Take the Next Step luncheon, got to see our seniors doing the parade down Main Street. That was pretty cool. The Pride event and the Juneteenth event at the parks, those were put on, and I was there as well. Good weather. So it was great to see everybody, and that is all.
Thank you. And yes.
One thing to report, I forgot, is I've had some reports from citizens thanking us for the new wayfinding signs and commenting about how nice they are, how helpful.
Keep going. We're gonna do it around. Also went to the Pride event and it was awesome, like usual. Everybody was awesome down there, and it was a fun event. Very, very well put together. Okay, I think that's it.
Thank you. And I had nothing to report, so we'll move on to section 8, the city administrator's report. Deborah Knight.
Is it on? There we go. Thank you. The extended agenda, so looking to next week, June 27th, our P3 committee meeting has been canceled. So if you're on that committee, you can take the night off. We do have a regular business meeting. We have a consent agenda that includes accounts payable and payroll, meeting minutes, a contract with Found Therapy Services for in-house telehealth and mental health services for Chief Jolly and the police department. Evergreen State Fair Traffic Services Agreement, again with Chief Jolly, and then a trip hazard bid contract with Jordan Auto and the Public Works Department. We will have a public hearing and an ordinance to adopt the 6-year transportation improvement plan from Scott Peterson. On final action, we'll have the ordinance for the transportation impact fee updates. And then under new business, we have the temporary relocation of meetings. That's city council and board and commission meetings, since this facility won't be available for those meetings after July. And then appointments for the Community Human Services Advisory Board and unfinished business for the bond sale update from our finance director, Becky Hassard, and then reports from staff. For the council meeting on July 4th, that has been canceled in honor of July 4th. So again, we have the first meeting of the month will be canceled, and we will see everybody in the following week on July 11th.
Thank
For-
you.
but-
Do you
yeah.
want to go to
City Administrator
the
reports.
administrator report?
I can do that.
All right.
For July 11th, that will be the council's first meeting in the school administration building. So we will send out a reminder. I also was noticed today for two things related to the City Hall remodel. We do have the posters now that we'll start to put up in these buildings and around town, just notifying everybody that this building is going to be closed and where to find city services. And then we have a postcard that's going to be mailed to all residents within the city limits. Again, just announcing that City Hall at this facility will be closed and where they could find city services going forward. So it's getting to be close to a reality that this facility is going to go through its renovation. So that's exciting. Again, Becky Hassard will have an update for us on the bond sales and how that went. And then a couple of other updates. We've got the building code adoption, which came to the city council last month, has been postponed to July at the state level with an anticipated effective date now of October 29th. So the state actually pushed back the date of the effective date and then the implementation date. And then our lodging tax advisory committee chair position is open, and we're looking for anybody that may be interested in taking that position. Is that a council position, the chair? Okay. And I think Councilmember Fulcher, you previously chaired that committee. Is that correct? So if anybody else is interested, let Jody know. Councilmember Fulcher can tell you what a great committee that is and how much fun it is to work with. And that's it for the city administrator's report.
All right, thank you. Moving on to the mayor's report. I'll refer you to his report on the online edition 24. And so we'll move on to the discussion items. First, we have the city branding project update. And who's handling that?
Speak. I also have a couple other people for that.
All right.
Becky is live.
Hi, are you guys ready for us?
Hello, yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you.
Okay, great. For those that don't know me, I'm Becky Hassert. I'm the finance director here at the city, and I'm also the project manager for the city's branding update project. And tonight I have with me both Alex Domain, and please forgive me if I'm pronouncing your last names wrong, and Bridget Baith. They are with Jay Ray, who is our consultant that we engaged to do this branding project. If council remembers, back in August of 2022, you guys approved the contract with Jay Ray, and it has started. Phase 1 is now complete, and that included the survey that most of you have taken. And we're now into phase 2, and phase 2 starts with a report tonight from Jay Ray on what we have found out of phase 1. So with that, and with your permission, Mayor Pro Tem, I would like to turn it over to both Bridget and Alex.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Wonderful. So just so you all know, we can't see the screen that you're seeing, but we do know. Oh, wait, maybe we can. We can see the screen now. Wonderful. Well, we'll go ahead and dive in. Again, my name is Alex, and my role on the project so far has been helping guide the brand research process. And so, as Becky mentioned, we're at the edge of phase 1 into phase 2, and this council meeting felt like a good moment to share our findings with you. And before we go further, I want to briefly recap. Phase 1 is comprised of a large research effort, which we'll go over what that means. And then phase 2 will be the analysis of those findings. Before we dive in, I also want to clarify kind of what this report is and what it isn't. What this report is basically what we have found through all the different methods of research that we've deployed. What it isn't, and what it's important to remember that it isn't any kind of final recommendation. Those will come in the future as the branding project advances. So with that, I think we can go to the next slide here. This is just a brief outline of the slide deck that you can review later. We'll be providing this work digitally as needed. So when you receive this in print, know that that's just the outline. So for this summary, I also want to take a moment to reiterate what this research is working towards. And every effort that we've made so far is in pursuit of what we at JRAY call your 3 Ps. So that's your personality, your position, and your promise. Your brand personality is the outward face, and your brand position is how you stand out among other cities, and the brand promise is what is true about Monroe with each touch point and encounter. So that's really why we lay the groundwork with this large body of work, is so that we can accurately get at those. So I wanted to briefly just take a moment to remind the folks in the room that that's why we're doing this. There are different facets of the research. Analysis and survey, focus groups, and interviews, and those are offered in 2 different languages. On the right on the screen, you'll find some of our key takeaways overall, and I'll go over individual takeaways from each effort. But overall, you'll see the first mention there is consistency, and the audit really brought that to light for us. It's a way for us to understand the current lay of the land. What we found there is an opportunity for consistency between platforms. So for example, there could be an opportunity to ensure phrases and branding for things like Imagine Monroe and Choose Monroe. Things like that can be streamlined. So those are some of the things that the brand audit brought to the surface for us. As I said before, phase 2, where we're at right now, is going to be dedicated to digging in and analysis. They're not recommendations, but we will be analyzing. So a large part of that analysis includes testing. And so there are 3 themes from the research efforts that we want to test in phase 2. The first is this idea of pride in a small town. And we do understand that the term small town has kind of earned its fair share of possible negative connotations. So our task moving forward is to find out how we can capture this theme in a way that's authentic and relevant and positive. Access to nature is another emerging theme that we want to explore in phase 2, as is safety and community. On the next slide, you can see here that we broke down participation for you. So on slide 5, you'll see that it's important to note that we also make sure that our research is inclusive as possible. So we try to reach as many people as we possibly can, and we make every effort to make sure that this work is inclusive. We had 1,036 online survey responses. 586 of them live in Monroe. 256 of them live and work in Monroe. 117 work in Monroe only, and 77 were visitors. We interviewed 9 key partners, and we partnered with city leadership to identify who those partners would be. And we conducted 2 focus groups in 2 different languages and analyzed 6 peer cities, which I'll go into here in a moment. On the next slide, you can see the businesses that we engaged. We partnered with city leadership, as I said, to identify these folks on the screen. And in the research report that we will provide, you will see that we've included what the questions that we ask and things like that. But I'll dive into that when we get into the interviews. On the next slide, now that we've covered how we did it and who we did it with, in the next slides, I want to share with you what we found. So we've used a proven method for the audit. And what that means is that multiple JRayers analyze messaging and visuals on some key platforms and channels. We analyzed Choose Monroe, social media, website, Monroe This Week, and the Economic Development newsletter. And our primary takeaway is that there's a ripe opportunity to create consistency in copy, messaging, and visuals. Like I said earlier, consistency was the first thing that came to the top. Adding a consistent and unified look and feel, brand message, and visuals will help generate kind of a memorable impression that will carve out an identity for Monroe and build loyalty for your audience. Some other themes and opportunities that we can test moving forward is finding visuals, what visuals communicate Monroe's brand. We understand that, especially with social media and website, technology moves at such a rapid pace. But what we have found is that compelling visuals is always going to be a consistent marker of a strong piece of communication. And show the best way you have to offer everything you brag about in the Imagine Monroe statement. There's a lot of really beautiful content in there that can then translate into some of these key platforms that we audited. On the next slide, I'll go into the brand survey. So this is one of the larger efforts in the research process. We targeted 4 segments and surveyed them digitally. Those who live in Monroe only, those who work in Monroe only, those who live and work in Monroe, and those who visited Monroe for leisure and work. Approximately 68% of the respondents identified as female, and the largest age group reflected in the survey results are ages 35 through 44. And 75% of the respondents identified as white, and 14% preferred not to identify their ethnicity or racial group. On the right, you'll see some of the themes that I pointed out earlier come up. Small town, again, how can we capture this kind of pride in a way that leaves behind any kind of preconceived notions of what a small town might mean to someone who sees a small town as a negative thing? And that's something that we'll test in phase 2. What we'll also test in phase 2 is nature. For example, does nature mean the distance from Monroe to the mountains, or is it the outdoors in Monroe proper, like your parks, for example? We also want to test community. Does community mean building community, such as access to events, or does it mean individual relationships with one another? These are the kind of questions that we'll deploy in the next phase to make sure that we're actually capturing what these words mean and have them translate into your brand. On slide 10 is the comparative analysis. We conducted an analysis against Bothell, North Bend, Linwood, Everett, Moses Lake, and Puyallup. And what we do when we do comparative analysis is we have a set of brand factors. We look at website, we look at tagline, we look at any kind of messaging that the cities use. We analyze their photography, their design, the colors they use, what we can kind of gain based on what we can find as their brand position, as their sort of sell, and what is their promise. So those are the things that we use in our comparative analysis. And on the right here, you can see the concept of everyone feeling at home in Monroe and that they belong is a unique selling point that can be leveraged and expanded upon. We also found an opportunity to build name recognition and carve out a little bit more brand equity compared to the peers we measured. On the next slide, focus groups. This is another really large effort for the research. We conducted them in 2 different languages, English and Spanish, because again, we strive for an inclusive process. So the participants came with different experiences that all fall into these 4 buckets: residents, visitors, students, Spanish-speaking constituents. On the right, you can see that the focus groups is kind of where we inch a little bit closer to those personality, position, and promise pieces that I talked about in the beginning. You'll see how we've characterized Monroe's attributes as kind and growing and small. And another one that came to the top was Monroe will never be unsafe is a possible position. Similar testing activities will probably be used at our next workshop with brand ambassadors, which was just scheduled for June 28th. So yeah, the focus groups is where we start to approach some of those 3 Ps with a finer point. And finally, on the next slide, interviews. We, while the focus groups were going and while the survey was being gathered, we also currently conducted one-on-one interviews, phone interviews, with people who own and operate businesses in Monroe. Many of these business leaders have kind of a unique insight into brand position. So again, on the right there, you'll see we start to lean into what makes Monroe different from other cities, because as business leaders, they might have more to share when it comes to that. Words like quiet, friendly, down to earth, and respectful were themes from the interviews. And on the next slide, I'm going to pass it over to Bridget here to talk a little bit about our key insights. We'll kick it off with some place branding.
Thanks, Alex. Yeah, so just real quick, I'm Bridget Baith. I'm a senior advisor and one of J-Ray's principal owners. My role on this project is overall brand strategy. You'll hear us mention place branding a lot. And I first just want to make sure, can everyone hear me okay? Okay, perfect. So you'll hear us mention place branding a lot. And that's more of a modern take on community branding. So it's less about the overall look and feel or story that just one city or one organization uses. And instead, it's a unified story that works for economic development, it works for tourism, that really multiple organizations can share and use and customize for their own need. So why does Monroe need a place brand? We feel a place brand will help us create a collaborative and more competitive or successful place. In its simplest form, place branding is important because people wanting to visit Monroe means people wanting to move to Monroe, and also means companies wanting to tap the talent that you have. So you end up with a cohesive and coordinated enhanced community image that creates overall a stronger competitive advantage. When people know what you stand for and it's crystal clear, it's easier for them to choose Monroe. So first I wanted to share a quick example from Waupaca, Wisconsin. They rebranded a few years back with the goal of uncovering a shared sense of place for those who live in, work in, or visit Waupaca. So they leveraged their brand research, so similar to the brand research that we've just done for Monroe, to craft their cohesive visual identity, as well as develop coordinated key messages. So on the screen, you'll see the overall community place brand at top, with a logo that says Waupaca, Wisconsin, and hopefully everyone can see that. This is really meant to be an inclusive brand that anyone in their community can use. And supporting the overarching brand, you'll find similar logos and badges that organizations and city government uses within the community. So the first one on the left there is the tourism brand what the destination marketing group uses. So it carries over the same kind of visual identifier, that W from Waupaca, and it says Chino Lakes. So that was what they found during research. And they wanted to encompass that well-loved attraction because it's what really set them apart in the minds of visitors. So that's what they heard from the visitor survey. So that was a strong differentiator. City government, they updated their city seal to be a much more modern kind of on-brand look. And of course, still included the year of incorporation, which is important to their story. Residents groups from running clubs to artists use this We Are Waupaca badge, which really created this sense of pride among the local community. And then finally, local businesses had this Waupaca, Wisconsin made badge. You'll see it on tote bags that you'll see at the farmers markets, window clings on storefronts, and again, really gave a sense of pride in the community. So you can see all these visuals working together in a unified way. Therefore, the brand is really strong. It's more recognizable because of it. If you want to go to the next slide.
Yeah, so thanks, Bridget, for sharing the Waupaca example, because we think that that one is a really strong model. So one way we can leverage place brand is by organizing the themes by city sectors like we just saw. So for example, nature's getaway could be a tourism piece, safety for government, housing for residents, safety for businesses. There are a lot of different research streams that have come up, and it can be a little bit difficult to kind of shove them into a place that makes sense, and it can be easy for it to be confusing. So a place brand is one method or approach that we can use to kind of organize these key themes. It can take any number of shapes. So if it does not work in this way, on the next slide, we also show a different way it could work. depending on how the city chooses to manage the brand. So for example, if the chamber's involvement will be minimal, we can organize it in a narrower way where you can see here, you still have Monroe as the top place brand, but you have community and businesses as the sub brands. And I'm going to have Bridget kind of talk through a similar example that we did for Oregon here on the next slide.
Yeah, and I do want to step back and just say too, it can sound confusing, which is why we're kind of jumping ahead in this presentation and sharing some visuals. We're definitely not there on the visual step yet for Monroe. We really want to make sure that we get the meaning accurate, that the brand authentically represents Monroe, and that whatever we come up with will work for Monroe in the truest way. But these are just to help you think about place branding and how something might evolve for Monroe, and help us think how Monroe can best talk to its different audiences. So on the screen, this is an example from Oregon. This is a place brand that we recently worked with a little over a year ago. It was with a group originally called Mid-Valley Partners, representing Oregon's Mid-Willamette Valley, which makes up 8 rural communities that realized when marketing together, they can make a bigger impact on economic development. So we helped them rename through part of the branding process to the Rural Economic Alliance for Oregon, or REAL for short. So on the screen, these are some visual place brand concepts we presented. And this is just an example of how different visual marks can work together under a single identity. Because the communities have varying audiences based on their different initiatives, we created that primary logo at the top, Real Oregon, that they could then use when talking about the whole area. And then we developed logos for different city sectors, such as business and community. So whether it's a Chamber of Commerce or Visitors Bureau or city government or Parks and Rec, these logos can help tell a greater story. And for them, it was also important that these logos work with each of their own individual rural community brands. And so we definitely took that into consideration as well. Next slide. And again, this was another concept of a place brand. So showing how you can adopt that similar look and feel. This again was with Real Oregon. So here we have Choose Rural Oregon being the primary logo, and then Real Business and Real Community as those. You could even think of them as badges that are supporting messages that go along with the brand. So again, we'll be exploring more place brand visual concepts for Monroe that help us tell a unified story on what makes Monroe a great place to live, to work, to play, to visit, and how other organizations and groups in the community might use the brand to help share Monroe's story in a cohesive way that's authentic and that lives up to the brand that we've uncovered. Next slide.
So thanks, Bridget. I know that we're over time here, so I'll go over this pretty quickly. Now that we have this large body of work, it's time to kind of dig into it and move into that phase 2. So what this looks like is the next big milestone that we have is June 28th, where we have a group of brand ambassadors that city leadership has helped us assemble to do some of that preliminary testing. So we're going to test some of these takeaways that we've gotten from this brand research. From there, we'll go through an analysis process that'll include actually crafting those 3 Ps. And leadership from here will guide the consensus and decisions on those 3 Ps, helping us arrive at a personality, a position, and a promise. And then in phase 4, that's when all of this starts to come to life in visuals and images, where you get to start interacting with the Monroe brand in the way that you're used to interacting with other brands. So that's when things really start to take shape. But that's in general where we are in the process. And thank you for allowing us a little bit of time to report on where we are so far.
And if I may, Alex, I would just like to add that there will be multiple touch points with the various boards, and most especially with council, as we continue to move forward in this process and we start to get a better definition of what the 3 Ps will be. So kind of consider this one of the first touch points. And we just want to thank you for the opportunity to be able to hit 2 of the boards tonight in one fell swoop. So yeah, and thank you, Alex and Bridget.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you for the presentation. That was very good. Thank you. I'd like to see if there's any questions or comments from any of the council members or anybody in the body. Councilmember Kinney.
Thank you very much, Mayor Pro Tem, and thank you for the presentation. I do have a couple of questions for the team. First of all, a while back, we had talked about including seniors, the senior population, elderly population in Monroe as part of the groups represented in your research. And I'd like to applaud you for including students. I think that's a wonderful idea. I was curious how that looked, if it was high school students or if you included younger students in that group. You're muted.
I'm unmuted. It was definitely high school in the focus group.
And did you go to the high school for that research?
The focus group was conducted virtually.
Okay, and how large was that body of students?
It was only, I believe, I don't have the exact number, but it wasn't a focus group dedicated to students. We had maybe one or two representatives from the student body, I believe.
Okay.
Yeah, and what we tried to do with the focus groups is again, to keep it manageable, we kept them to 10 to 12 participants in total, and tried to have a broad selection of not only age groups, but also different interests throughout the community. But wanted to make sure that we had at least one student representative in that focus group. In addition, during the survey, which is one of the bigger one of the heavier lifts with collecting data, I myself personally took invitations down to the senior center to invite the seniors, as many as were willing to take that survey. We wanted to make sure that it got out to like the Key Club and various groups like that up at the high school, to try and encourage as many people as possible from again, all the different aspects of the community to be involved. But as you can imagine, in order to keep this moving along, we had to limit the focus groups because quite frankly, we could still be doing focus groups if we tried to hit every single potential community out there.
Thank you. Another question I have, or the survey was conducted December 15th through January 13th, which is right in the Christmas holiday. A lot of people are out of town. I'm concerned about that. I just want to make sure that we are getting a fair representation of feedback from this community before we move forward. A lot of us have lived here. I haven't lived here my whole life, but the branding is really important. And I've gotten some feedback from the community that they feel like not everyone is listened to, or it's just a certain group of people that are making the decisions about our logo and our colors and all of that. And I'm concerned with a month-long survey, over Christmas and New Year's, when, I certainly am not plugged into doing things like that during the Christmas holiday. I'm just a little concerned about that. And then my last question has to do with the 9 businesses that were engaged. I was wondering how those were selected. 3 of them are eateries on Main Street that are really close together. So I was wondering if you could explain to me how you selected those businesses.
And I can go ahead and take those questions. Also, with the survey, we recognize that there might be some challenges in doing it over the holiday. Originally, it was only slated to be open for 2 weeks, but because of the holidays, we did extend that. We did get over 1,000 participants, which actually is one of our better responded to surveys that we've had. I mean, we didn't quite make Parks Department numbers, but we came close. And we also included the annual business survey. J. Ray was gracious enough to work with our economic development specialist on that so that we wouldn't have survey fatigue out in the community as well. And then again, one of the things that we did is, we personally, I say we, myself and a couple of other staff members did go out and we personally delivered, actually had postcards both in English and in Spanish that we delivered to a lot of different organizations throughout the city with the QR code, inviting people to please take the survey. That, you know, which is why I think we did have what I felt like was a very good response to that. We do recognize that the time of year was a bit of a challenge. However, again, you know, as you pointed out, Councilmember Kinney, this is an important project, and we also didn't want it to continue to delay it. We wanted to keep it moving. As for how the businesses were chosen, we tried to get a cross section of various businesses. One, we reached out, and one of the businesses that was included was our largest business in town, Canyon Creek. And they were gracious enough to partake. There were others that we had reached out to, and some folks where they said that they would be happy to participate ended up not being able to have the time to be able to do it for us. And we wanted to reach out to businesses that we don't typically hear from. You mentioned the 3 eateries along Main Street. Part of the reason that we picked those 3 of those was the fact that they come from a more diverse background than sometimes from other folks that we hear from. You know, we picked an AAPI business, we picked an Hispanic business. We wanted to make sure that those voices were heard as well. And then given the importance that both, you know, current administrations and prior administrations has put with regards to our downtown, we also wanted to make sure that they were heard. Again, you know, businesses also had an opportunity to partake through the survey, and quite a few did. They not only took the branding survey, but they also took the business survey. And the feedback that we received from the economic development specialist that we have was he was very pleased with the response level that he had with partnering and doing the surveys together like this. So I don't know if that gets to all of your concerns. Again, you know, in an ideal world, we'd be able to hear from everybody in town. But I really do believe that this partnership did everything that we could to try and get as many voices as we could.
Great. I really appreciate that explanation. I know it's really difficult to go out in the community and try and engage people. And sometimes they'll say, yes, we'd love to participate. And then when you go back to actually collect the information or set up the meeting, they're too busy or they just can't do it. So what you've done a great job. I think that this is difficult stuff. I just had those concerns, and I really wanted to make sure that the senior community and the students are kind of you know, along with a lot of our, we just have a lot of groups in the community that are underrepresented and don't have a voice. And so I just want to make sure everyone's included. So thank you very much for addressing all those questions. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Councilmember Kinney. Councilmember Scarborough.
Yeah, hi Becky, thank you for that. Appreciate it also. What I think I heard you say was you only had 2 high school students that responded. And I didn't hear you say how many seniors may have responded.
We don't have the numbers for specifically if you're talking about the survey. We had 1 high school student participate in the online Zoom focus group. And then we did have, if you define senior as folks over 60, we also had 2 participants in that focus group that would qualify as well. Specifically with regards to responses to the surveys themselves, again, we can go back to the demographics. The majority of folks that did respond to that survey were, as Alex mentioned earlier, were more in the 35 to 44 age group. You know, again, we can ask as often as we can. I know when I first dropped off those postcards, and I did go back a second time to the senior center, there were a couple people who grabbed them and immediately jumped onto a computer. But, you know, then again, you know, other folks had other interests going on. So just to clarify, we don't have specific numbers because we tried to make the survey as anonymous as possible. And it was only those who were willing to fill out the demographics that we would have any numbers on that. But with regards to the focus group, especially for the English focus group. We did have one high school student and a couple of seniors that participated.
Okay, thank you.
Were there any other comments or questions? Not seeing any. Thank you again for the presentation. Thank you, Director Hassert. And was there anything else, or is that it?
Nope, that was it. Thank you for your time.
All right. Again, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, moving on to 9.2, the Joint City Council and Planning Commission meeting. Comprehensive Plan Status Update and the Monroe 2044 Land Use Exercise. Mr. Bailey.
Thank you very much. So this evening we have Alex and Sue from MIG. I believe everybody has met them. They've done presentations for both Planning Commission and City Council. And I want to thank both groups for being here at the work session. I think this is a unique opportunity to present some of the initial findings that we have from the first sort of the first level of community outreach. We've been doing survey. This has been a busy month for some of the events. We've been getting out and doing booths, tents at the events. We're also going to be at the block party on Friday. So we're looking to wrap up the first stage of the community outreach by the end of this month. And I know that Alex and Sue have some initial findings that they want to present, that we've put this information together. And then afterwards, so we sort of have a two-step meeting this evening. We also want to do a mapping exercise. The Planning Commission has already done, and I know there were a number of council members that were at the community kickoff where we did this mapping exercise, but we thought it would be a good idea to have both the Planning Commission and City Council come together and we can do that exercise. And it'll be, I think it'll be particularly helpful that we've got input from the community, some of the community responses that we have. So we can build on that, and we'll put on our creative hats for that exercise. And with that, I will turn it over to Alex and Sue.
Thank you, Lance. Jody, can you share the presentation? Help me click through. Great. Well, thank you everybody for the time tonight. My name is Alex Dupuy. I'm a principal with MIG and the project manager for this project. And I'm with Sue Garner, who's the deputy project manager and leading the public engagement. We have been busy since April when we had our initial public kickoff at the local high school. We had about 50 or so people attend, and since then have launched a survey, done focus groups. We've met with high school students, and we've also been out and about at various events throughout the city. And the real focus of this initial public engagement is to establish a couple different things. One is, how do you implement the existing city vision, Envision Monroe, that you have today as part of your policy document, which is the comprehensive plan moving forward. So it's actually putting action into that implementation and vision strategy that you already have. The second piece of this is to be able to identify and align direction for land use, utilities, transportation, and other critical elements that are part of the comprehensive plan, so that in the late summer and early fall, we can start to look at scenarios for how we address growth, both from a housing standpoint as well as employment. We know with the city as a whole that we have to increase the number of housing units that we have currently within the city, but also address the amount of employment that we'll need to consider as well too. So this initial discussion and kind of group orientation around how Monroe grows over time is really important for how we start to move forward in thinking about specific policy and action recommendations, as well as developing those scenarios that will be coming back to you in the fall. Essentially, building up to those series of what ifs. What if we grow a certain direction or another direction? So we're going to step through just some of the preliminary results of the engagement. The survey is still open through the end of the month. We've decided to leave it open a little bit longer because we are doing those intercept events like at Juneteenth and Farmers Market and other events that Lance identified, just to make sure we can capture as much input as possible from this first phase. And then we'll close that down. We'll start to refine that. We'll come back to you with some scenarios and then next steps likely in the fall. So with that, Jody, can you flip to the next slide? So in terms of community input, we did, as I mentioned, we had a community kickoff that many of you were at the high school. We'll be doing that similar exercise tonight, maybe a little bit more focused, but we're going to be using those same puzzle pieces to look at land use and growth within the city. We've taken that input and started to look at how that is also reflected in an online survey. So we used a very similar process as what we did at the public kickoff, but we did it digitally. And so we'll share some of those results. I think actually it was very interesting, just kind of thinking about the results of in-person versus online, very similar ideas, which was actually great because it helps us kind of see that, at least for those who are responding, there's some alignment in kind of how we're starting to think about growth and change. We also met with high school students. We had one initial meeting with Lance, Kate, and Anita, Sue and myself with a senior class, a civics class. It just happened to be senior ditch day. So that one was a little bit light, but city staff came back the next day and we had, I believe 13 students the first day and about 40 students the second day. So we had a good cross section. Actually, I was really excited because this teacher came back and said, we want you to come back in the fall when you have options and we want to get the entire class, all the classes together in the lunchroom and start to get through this. So really great relationship building opportunity with the teachers there, and just exciting to have them engaged. We've also met internally. And so, part of this, it's important to have that community input and engagement, but it's also important to understand from a city staff and expertise standpoint, how does this start to fit within the context of moving a comprehensive plan forward? Not just about land use, but about transportation and sewer and water and stormwater and parks, all of those elements. So we've been meeting internally a bit too, just to vet some of those results and start to think about, what that might be for that next step. Next slide. And so I'm just going to share some of this. I know this is a little bit small. These dots are essentially what that input is from both the community kickoff as well as some of the student group exercise work. And so those colors represent different types of land uses. And so we'll start to tease this out for the specific land uses in the slides. But what you can see, at least for this, is that there are concentrations of locations where people start to focus. One thing we've seen through both the online input as well as the in-person engagement is that people are really focusing on the core of Monroe, whether that's downtown Monroe or it's the commercial center. There's definitely dots in other locations, but people are really looking at that central space within the city and playing with the form and the land uses to figure out how we incorporate more housing and employment. Next slide. And so when we start to compare that to an online survey, so this is a heat map. So the darker the colors, so those blues, those are where you have just a couple points. Where you have those hot spots like the reds and the yellows, that's where we start to see a lot of concentrations of different types of land uses apply to the online survey. So if you were at the community kickoff, or if you've taken the survey, all of these points focus, at least on this slide, really where people are looking at detached housing on larger lots or even some on smaller lots. So you can see a really focus on the north side of the city, which isn't surprising. That's where the growth is occurring. That's where we're seeing a lot more typical subdivisions. But when you start to get into the next slide, Jody, when you start to get into some of the other types of land uses, and this is something we'll be talking about with you in terms of middle housing, which will be coming up, is how do you start to incorporate other types of housing development, whether this is duplexes or townhomes. So this is a bit more dispersed, but you start to see with those hot spots, again, that yellow coming up where we're seeing the most numbers of dots, people start to gravitate a little bit south of Highway 2. So, this is very similar to what we actually saw in the in-person event. So it's starting to think about, one, how neighborhoods evolve over time, but also when we start to think about centers, corridors, applying middle housing, which we have to do as a part of state requirements. It helps inform kind of what we start to think about and where we think about those things actually occurring. Next slide. Sure. Sure.
So what this tells me is the single family housing appears to be more predominant north of Highway 2. And we're starting to see the multi-family housing on the south side of Highway 2. Is that correct?
That's what community members are telling us. So those who responded to the survey, when we asked them, we have to apply a certain amount of growth based on requirements from Department of Commerce. So how would you locate about 2,500 housing units within the city? And so respondents to the survey identified, like you said, primarily south of Highway 2 locations for potentially duplexes and townhomes. So they're putting those on those spaces, but they are applying, trying to get to that point of how we apply that growth.
So I'm kind of confused. Are you telling me that your survey asked people where they thought multi-housing family would be, and that's what this projects?
Yep.
Okay. So they think that in what they're seeing is there any idea in what they're basing their thoughts on is the fact that they see more high density housing down here south of Highway 2 than they do see north of Highway 2?
So
Because that's what I see in this projection. I mean,
yeah,
driving around town, it shows me and tells me I can see where that housing is. I can drive down I can drive between Chevrolet and downtown and see where it is. And then I can go up Lowe's and above, and you still see mostly single family housing. But when people answer that question, what are they saying? I like it or I don't like it? Do they want to see more yellow housing north of Highway 2? Are they thinking that because it's south of Highway 2, it's low income housing instead of multi-family housing? What are their views?
well, that's, I think, certainly anybody who's responding to a survey or even come to a public meeting will bring their perspective on how that's applied. How we identified this and actually how we'll play this, the exercise is that what we asked people is that for both jobs and housing, there's a certain amount of housing and employment that we have to accommodate within the urban growth area. All things being equal, how would you do that? And so when we ask people, how do you think we should grow? Where do you think we should grow? That's how they're placing those pins. So it's not that all south of Highway 2 is lower incomes or all vacant land. It's more like the people who responded, and this is 179 different pins that people put in. We think, there's a higher percentage that put it south of Highway 2. Okay. Next slide. When we start to get into different types of uses, when we look at apartment buildings or even say like 3-story apartment buildings, garden apartments, or even larger apartment buildings, this actually starts to frame the question that you were asking is, where should those types of uses be focused? And we're starting to see this in this slide and the next ones, that the survey respondents are really starting to focus on the central core of Monroe. And if you'll notice, it's not just identified with areas that are already zoned for residential. And we saw this at the public kickoff too. It's also looking at how do we rethink our commercial areas? Should we allow housing within traditionally big box retail, for example? We heard a lot of comments looking at from the public meeting that people want more walkable spaces. They want districts. They want those elements. And so if you start to apply that qualitative discussion to more of the quantitative, input with the survey, they're really, they're starting to align a bit in what people are saying. So again, this isn't 100%, this is what thou shalt do, but we are starting to see concentrations of different types of uses in the central portion of Monroe. Next slide.
Uh, So in your survey, do people believe that there are two Monroes? That south of Highway 2 and that north of Highway 2? And I don't preface it with just Highway 2, but the railroad tracks. When we talk about walking here, walking there, walking to shopping, etc. Does your survey ask people how they feel about walking across the railroad tracks and Highway 2 to get to the northern part of Monroe?
We asked questions on, and I don't have it in this presentation, but we did ask accessibility questions, like how do you get around Monroe? Where do you identify dangerous spots or pinch points? So I don't cover that in this presentation, but we do ask those questions. We did, and we'll see this a little bit in the high school results. There was a lot of conversation about getting around, particularly with that community. A lot of those folks don't drive. They're on their bike, they're walking, some of them try to take the bus. That is a completely different perspective than all of us who likely drive to a lot of those locations. So I think it's important to consider both from an age standpoint, as well as an accessibility component. So we do have that in there. And when we close the survey out end of the month, we can come back and report on those findings. And that'll inform some of the transportation work as well.
And are the people aware of the state's proposal to put a roundabout at Highway 2 and Old Owen Road?
I'm not sure. We didn't ask specific questions about that.
It might be something to look at because there's 3 of them to go in. One of them's there, 2 of them are at Sullivan. First thing, I read the article and I thought of a roundabout at Main Street, Old Owen Road, Highway 2. I thought, first, it's gonna have to be huge. Second, it's gonna be busy.
Yeah.
And for people to get across it. I also remember in the survey, one of the first slides you showed, there was people concerned with crime. And I thought those were the yellow buttons, I guess not. But, and that's around Alborland Park was one of them. And traffic at, Highway 2 and Frylands Boulevard out there. I didn't realize that there was a deep concern about the congestion at that signal. So in saying that, I'm surprised it is not a projected spot of a roundabout. That doesn't matter for this survey.
Yeah, and I think for this, that tonight, we're focused on more the land use elements. We will be talking a lot about transportation in future spots. Basically, we need to get through land use so that we can give the transportation analysts the information to do their work. So that's why we're focusing on that. But these are great questions and we'll be able to report back on some of this. Next slide. And so, starting to, again, look at, this is a slide on folks who place commercial pins. And you'll notice that each of these pins have 200, 179, 273. That's the number of pins that were placed on each, for each land use type. So we got pretty deep information for people that went through a fairly complicated survey to be able to identify. But you also notice that that big yellow sun right in the middle is also the same place that people were putting mixed use, they're putting apartments, they're putting, so that's why we start to look at like, okay, what's the question here? What's the central space that people are looking at? And how do we, when you think about those comments that we heard on more the qualitative side, what are people really starting to look for and ask? And so we're digging into that more in the open-ended responses that we'll have report out once the survey closes at the end of the month. But it's just, I think it's telling what people are starting to look at. Next slide. And then this is more of a mix of businesses as homes. So this is thinking about like, you may have townhomes or apartments, but then you also might have small scale commercial next to it. So we call it horizontal mixed use. So instead of vertical mixed use where you have businesses on the ground floor with employment or housing on top, this is a mix that's called horizontal where it's separate buildings essentially, but kind of it's a similar outcome in terms of kind of close knit proximity to services and residential. So again, a little bit more dispersed. You see more in downtown here, which is actually not dissimilar to the type of development that's happening along Main Street or that has happened. But again, the further you get out, the less number of dots you get. So when people think about these spaces, they're thinking about urban spaces, as Monroe defines that. Next slide. And then, not surprising, this is industrial. When we asked about industrial uses, they put it in the industrial space. So, industrial is kind of its own unique animal in a lot of ways. It has specific building types, different traffic requirements. So, people identified a few spots here and there where it might be, a little bit more possible, like fairgrounds, that's identified there on some of the dots, but it's really, focus on keeping industrial where industrial is. Next slide. So we use this information, and you can't read this this graphic, but we started to map out like, okay, we have existing input, which we'll continue to modify. But we also looked at like, so what is some of this saying? And this is some of the stuff we want to tease out with you tonight is, how do we start to think about, higher density housing and mixed use development? Are they in annexation areas? There's some dots placed there. How do we start to think about Highway 2? Do we think about different development types along that corridor? But also, providing clarity for development along Main Street, and looking at some of those commercial core areas. So that's when we start to get into scenarios. It doesn't mean that this is actually like your future land use map. It's more ideas for us to start to think about. But these are things when we started to come together as an internal team, there were some ideas that folks started to have. And again, from a middle housing standpoint, that's your townhomes, duplexes, fourplexes, things like that. Those are already things in a lot of locations that are already going to be allowed under your middle housing code that's required by the state. And so how we start to think about that is how do you think about infill and other types of regulation as a part of that. So we're acknowledging that as a part of this process, but that's also a code question that Anita and others will be talking about here to you in the future. Next slide, please. All right, high school outreach. These were, if you've ever done a high school meeting or focus groups, I love doing them because they will tell you exactly what is wrong or what is going on. Or if you have a high school student or a teenager in your house, and I want to say, this was great conversation because it was a civics class. They were engaged. And some things not surprising when you think about a teenager, there was some things like there's nothing to do. I grew up in a big city and there was still nothing to do when I was in a big city. So some things are universal. But I think, a lot of the stuff that they said when we asked them, they're 17, 18 years old. Imagine yourself in 20 years. You're coming back, you may have kids. Would you come back to Monroe? What would it take for you to come back? What types of employment? What does it mean to raise a family in Monroe? What are those elements that, you would want to see as the city evolves over time? And I think we had some great discussions and a lot about employment, a lot about, you can maybe get a service oriented job here, but if I need to raise a family, I need a higher employment or higher wage opportunity. And that was something a high school kid's thinking about. We think about that now as adults and professionals, but they're thinking about that too, of how they might come back. Because many folks, we had one person said, I'm never coming back. But a lot of people said they would want to be back and raise a family, but they need a job. And so those are things that we can think about from a policy standpoint. To your question, Councilor Scarborough, improving streets and connections for pedestrians and bikes, that was a huge issue for them, thinking about how they get around. They don't want to be driven by their parents all the time, so they want to have that freedom and that accessibility. And when I think about demographics, it's kind of on an S curve. You have youth and then you have the elderly, and in a lot of ways, they're both thinking about land use and housing options in the same way, but also accessibility. Imagine if you can't drive anymore, how do you get around? And so it's actually similar in how we think about demographics from an urban form standpoint. But also, they want places to be, they want districts, so not dissimilar to what we were hearing from other spaces. Next slide, please. We also have been doing outreach at Farmers Market and Pride. People wanted to see more events and activities, in parks. People, talk about creating a community center, and I don't mean that by a building. That's really that space, that central location. Focusing growth downtown and along corridors and edges, that's very similar to what we've been hearing at other places, but also things about congestion and transit. So typically things that you hear when you talk about your growth and change. Next slide. And so that's where we're at now in terms of input. Lots of input, a lot of consistency with what we're hearing. Just to kind of wrap up this phase, the city will still be doing events for this next week or thereabouts. The survey is open until the end of the month, so we're trying to just round that out, and then we'll wrap up this piece, so this phase, and then come back to you, towards the end of the summer with some concept and scenario for you to review. But before we do that, we want to play the land use exercise with you as well too. And so what I'd like to do, so Lance, we're gonna pull the tables, and maybe Jody, if you could do me a favor and go back to the slide, the first slides that has. Keep going, that right there. Let's leave that up. Because that's some of the results that we can look back to, and you'll see those little boxes around there. Those are kind of little concentration areas. So we'll leave that up there just for reference. And then we're gonna play a game. Counselor?
Oh. I'm sorry, I was thinking about this earlier on, but I just wanted to mention it as potentially a note for you guys. You were talking about accessibility and mobility, and that was a great point about how it can be very similar for young people and the elderly. And I was thinking about our railroad crossings by foot, and I think the one by Rite Aid, what used to be Denny's as well, probably gets 70% of the cross railroad traffic. And I think that we have done a poor job as a city of making it, inviting is the wrong word, but safe and well lit, and a crossing that you would want your parent or grandparent to cross in either a wheelchair, or I don't know if 12-year-olds still walk around town. I used to. Or your 12-year-old across the tracks right there. Yeah. So when we're coming up with ideas about accessibility when it comes to infrastructure, I'd love to add an element of trying to get creative with our railroad crossings, so that we can help kind of bridge that gap of the feeling that you might have about the two sides of town. Obviously, being that it's in the middle of our town, if you're on foot, that's something that you encounter every day. So I guess point of it all is I'd love to see creative ideas on better railroad crossings by foot, right, both in terms of aesthetic and function.
Thank you.
I wanted to add one thing and it involves this accessibility and walkability issue. When we've been out at events talking directly with people, this issue comes up more than I think it has in the survey. The high school students, it was a big thing with them, but it's one of the top 5 issues that come up when we're talking directly with folks. They bring up Highway 2 and 522 and how that really bisects the community in ways that are difficult to get across. So it is being reflected in a lot of those conversations and at all the events. It's one of the top answer. And one of them that you probably couldn't see on there is that and I throw this out as the creative thing. I'm pretending I'm at one of the booths right now. Is we came up with this question. I don't remember how it came apart, but if Monroe was a song, what would it be? And so I throw that out there and let people think about that, because there's been some creative answers to it. So I would imagine we could get some creative ones with this group as well. That's all I have. It's got to be fun. It is a core value. No, it could be an instrumental.
Councilmember Kenny.
Thank you. I just wanted to commend you on going to the people, meaning going to the high school, going to Pride, it would have been great if you were at Juneteenth because you're going to where the people are. Maybe you were there. I don't know. I had to miss both of those. Unfortunately,
We had
that's
staff-
fantastic. Great. Because I think it's harder and harder to reach people and to get them, and this is Ms. Hassert, I'm speaking to you now too. It is really hard to engage people and get them to share. And I think everyone wants to share, but when you go to where they are, that's really, really wonderful. And I would just like to commend you for doing that. Those are those, you're capturing those underrepresented voices in the community that we really need to hear from. And then also just adding in that if there's any way in this process to try and capture some of the folks that are moving through town to recreate and do all these things, in the mountains, they have opinions too. And they may be a really rich source of information about what works and what doesn't work. So just throwing that out there, but yeah, really good job. Thank you.
All right, so what's next here? What do we need to do?
Yeah, we're gonna
Stand up.
We're gonna rearrange the room. So we're gonna push these center tables together because we're gonna actually put the map out and have everybody work on it. So let's see how this goes. That I've never seen one. I like that. I like the size.
Yeah, it's kind of clever because, you can just put it in your pocket and
Yeah.
you got something with you.
Make sure it's empty first.
Well, what's it?
I don't know what's going on, so I'm just keeping my hands off of it. I mean, I love helping, but I.
I'm retired.
All right, let's come on back to the table. We're ready. Gonna join around. We're all friends here, right? So close. Maybe. All right, I'll stand back. I'll stand. Okay, so for folks virtually, this will be a little bit hard for you, but I encourage you, if you haven't taken the survey, take the survey because it's very similar to what we're doing here tonight. This is the same game that we played during the kickoff in April with the community, and it's also the same game that we played with the high school students. So a couple, I guess, words of advice or direction. One is there's no wrong answer for this. This is a way for us to start thinking about growth and change, as well as potentially different types of land uses that you may or may not see within Monroe today. But it also helps us match and think about what we have to do in terms of meeting goals for housing and employment. So I'm going to just set out here. Housing, we need to place about 2,400 housing units, and employment, we need to place about 2,400 jobs. So that's our end goal. That's our job tonight for, say, the next half hour, thereabouts. So the first piece, and I'll show you how we'll do this. Well, feel free to answer questions. First of all, this map is not pristine. We have markers, draw on it, do whatever you think is necessary to create your vision. We'll put some paper out on the side as well too. But what we want you to start doing is thinking about what the community said, which is why we put that up there, to start thinking about that, and we can go back into the slides. But start thinking about, in 20 years, what does Monroe look like from a land use standpoint? What are the different types of uses that we need to accommodate, thinking about today's demographics, but also changing demographics over time in terms of who lives here, how they live, where they live. But also, what types of services and employment options are needed for people who do move here. And so it's pretty straightforward. It's just grab a foot, a little plastic foot here, so you put one together already. And all you do is say, I think we should have larger apartments. I don't want, and so again, nothing is wrong, so don't say it's here, say that's a terrible idea, you got away. Talk about it and see why. Yeah. So that's a great question. So we have images here of these different pieces. It's not 100% defined, but apartment building, how we define it, is like 3 stories. Larger apartment buildings might be 4 or 5 stories. And if you look, same thing with commercial, different types of commercial, industrial, housing over businesses could be mixed use with 2 stories, and then larger housing over businesses doesn't mean bigger units. It just means more. So we're going to let you have at it for a little bit, and we're not going to direct you, but what we'd like to do is start to come around the map and start to think about this. And if there are questions, somebody puts a piece down, it's okay to ask, kind of thoughts around that. And so we're going to get one. You can take as many as you want.
Oh, really? And so just having watched folks do that, so the colors correspond to the on the side that have the.
Thank you, Lance, for that. Yeah, so just grab, if you can see a color, it's close to the image there. That's what we're looking at. Just a word of advice, place more on there than you think.
Yes.
If we know specifically, like I want Central School to be turned into pool condo apartment things. So if I have that idea, can I write it down?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Just draw it around. Yeah.
Hey,
So I have to find it on here. in the right spot.
Underutilization. So like, we have 5% of our surface
So,
property is industrial. So we have a limited amount.
so just write.
Our industrial survey was 2018. 5%.
You want condos, so condos downtown.
But there's vacant properties in the industrial. So what piece do I use to make them go vertical so we can have jobs there?
Oh.
So what I would say is grab whatever you think is the right job. Grab it and then write it on the map. You go over the. Yeah, so again, map, not pristine, have notes. That's how we're gonna start.
The parade. And I was at the. I know, and I was at the parade. When I did
That's my solution too.
I saw that.
Living somewhere. Living wage.
Do you?
Did they?
So jump in there, come around.
I mean, we've done one before. Mostly kind of.
Okay. So I would think if you don't mind, you know, just figured something to. What have you done now, Mayor? I'm not sure. I don't think we did so very well. I was gonna see if tonight I got you. So Lewis to maintainer. Cater and then one other person. It's funny because that's
I want buildings. I want no dirt. I want no grass. I want no deer, no rabbits. I want jobs. I need at least 2 full stories
Got everybody else in there.
in an industrial park. Whatever we're allowing, I want people building stuff, making stuff, widgets, gadgets. Probably not more cabinets, but, right? We got enough cabinet makers. I need something else.
Yeah, we still. And I haven't found.
It looks good, doesn't it? That's a, that's a property owner that's got a lot of money that can build on spec.
That's good, yeah. Yeah.
We get a lot of reports. Multifamily, commercial.
And I want to protect.
Warehouse. I mean, they know.
So have we say, no.
There's a parks, there's one for parks.
Because it's on your highlands, right?
Grab 2. I want one on there too.
Where's like?
You know, what if I didn't see that?
Okay,
They don't.
so that's gonna be where.
Everybody's looking for.
I don't think there's any like duplexes or townhomes back there,
They could also warehouse.
right?
I mean,
Cause I know when we first moved here, we lived over in the Blueberry apartment. And I just feel like I would want people who can't really afford to buy a home and, you know, beautiful, home, that they still have the opportunity to experience the beauty. That's just like, you know, so maybe wherever, so where's Roosevelt?
it does sound a little.
Right here.
Remember the house up here. This is one house.
Mhm.
Get his name off. Forget his name off. The big
He's got a lot of cars that
car.
Wait, is that, do you see that? You're good.
I know.
So the mansion, is that what? Do you see it from Highway 2? Yeah. So where's Jack in the Box? Okay, so there's Jack in the Box.
You're coastal.
Okay, and so don't we have like other houses up in here, right?
What kind of house?
This is like, is it single family home, right? Would it be even possible for like duplexes and townhomes to be? Cause they said, well, cause that's what Snohomish is too, right? Up in there.
He traded them at one point. This finger was there.
Mm-hmm,
So we both had buses going up there.
mm-hmm.
At some point, we traded the home for this or something. So it could stay. in Hartford.
Okay. Okay, so here's the fairgrounds. Right, and so we have,
So the airfield. could stay. Well, there's an issue again, that came up. There's a gas line through there.
oh, wow.
Was precluding them from doing something. Supposedly, they have an offer from PUD.
Oh,
I am.
Let's write it. We can just write it. Industrial
I think it would be industrial. I think that's industrial,
Good question.
right?
Well,
Oh, you. Girl. My kids, I told my kids the night before, I was like, oh, we're singing the Black National Anthem at Juneteenth. They're like, Mom, I was like, stop, we done sang it before, stop. Thank you.
yeah,
Um, So would people like, that's where they would work? Cause is there a PUD by the old district building? What is that? Okay. Oh, okay.
So we got stuff going there.
Yeah.
So what do you?
My main thing is I want to see more, I was listening when we were saying like south of basically the track and then north, right? And so I remember like when my family moved here, like we moved from California 5 years ago. And rent was so high that all we could really afford was an apartment. And so we live like on Blueberry. And so my main thing is I want to give people the opportunity who cannot buy their home, who aren't, rich, or have the money, or, to still experience the beauty, right? So like when you talk about like up Chain Lake Road, and I know we might go into like transportation issues, because there's no bus line that goes up there and, but even like the Chain Lake area, even like where they're building $1 million homes. You know what I'm saying? Like, can we kind of mix it up? Because I work for the school district. And I know that a lot of our boundaries that they have, they're very like, but you can tell, like all the inner city kids.
well, this is.
All the, and I'm just not for all, I just feel like, it should be a good mix. So someone had already put it there, but like up Chain Lake Road, duplexes, townhomes.
That's what the required. That's what.
Mhm.
That line is one of the more residential,
Mhm.
black line city limits, so you should just say that. So
Okay.
make sure you're part of this.
But I'm like, if I rule the world.
Well, that's what we're doing right here, right?
Right.
Never clarified what I'm talking about.
Yes. Yeah.
That's when you can move, so.
No, that's great. No. Well, I think we can probably get it out. So it's okay. So we did have, you get the location of the area. How do you get it? It's right.
So.
And an overpass coming up.
Even though we don't work.
Yeah.
And my parents didn't want
Danny. You have to go across the track, across to. Really make it realistic. Yes, IHOP. IHOP has a different idea. They bought the mall too. Supposed to have access to. Add on.
I don't believe that they're gonna add on.
I think that's really
They're gonna
Yes, absolutely.
reconfigure part of the. Drive-through.
Next time. Get in on. West end of the drive there. Come drive through and come out. East side. No, yeah.
Which.
But you can come out, sounds like they can come out of Denny. Come out. Healthy. And only.
It'll be better, it won't be perfect.
No.
You know, you're dealing with a lot of obstacles.
Well,
Here,
if you
thank
want,
you.
to find out what the train problems are. Talk to Ed, because I brought up, I brought up train station.
Because I know
Eleven.
when I moved here, I didn't want to be
Yep.
limited to only in.
With one of the.
Because we moved, when we moved, we like had to move within like 2 months because Avery had started working here. And so the only place we could move was Blueberry Apartments. You know, and so. Our morning runs.
They're
No.
like. They're like.
So
Like a truck.
Blueberry,
Yeah.
Blueberry,
Interstate commerce.
that runs like over where the overpass is. So we're on 102nd.
You know, my point.
Like, I
They
can walk.
could buy a ticket. They could communicate when you train. There's nobody.
Yes, yes.
There's nobody there.
Well,
Or we even have a hundred.
you know, with,
Because when we were. When I was.
Can I ask y'all a question real quick? So. I'm noticing on this, we have a big annexation area just north. That's great, it's all that vision. But we are not dealing with our current areas outside of the city limits within the urban growth area. You look at the map up here, what the community is telling us is they did start looking at those places, so. Should on this map, should we start to think about some of those locations and creatively about that again, thinking about community demographics, employment, housing, parks and parks and schools. Should we start to look at some of those other areas that we're, I don't know, creatively avoiding maybe in here? You know, so what's this area up here? What is that? You know, I see we got this little space down here. You know, kind of, do we think about any of those locations as well? Because the comp plan does cover those spaces. I'm not requiring it, I'm just kind of suggesting.
so
Not seeing.
the
Getting
UGA
some.
areas are where the red is, right? So we're looking right there. Okay, so I see red right here. Is this all part of the urban growth too? Mhm.
Well, they didn't know. What thing to do.
Come on, put that out there. Come on, put that. Yeah.
South, you know.
Stick that over by
Okay.
Roosevelt Road, kind of. And a little more of this, anywhere in there, I guess.
Okay, those are gonna bring the jobs. Yeah. Okay.
They're gonna.
The larger houses over this. There's none of that on.
What are we gonna be low on? I'll start with. Just trying to get some intel.
Your 5 minutes.
I'm just thinking next year. I'm just gonna. I'll try and figure out where I'm at here.
You don't even know. Call me and ask me.
Rude.
Dude.
All right.
Amy picking them up.
There you go.
I'm just-
It is manufacturing, like light industrial space. Where
But it's not rented,
No. Yeah.
so we can potentially use, I mean.
I had a room with someone. Yeah, we were VRBO
gonna,
or SR, STRs, however you want to say it. Like the new ones down there.
what could go in? Oh, thank you.
I think not individually, but we will ask.
Oh, my God.
Yeah, I think let's just go around the table. That's probably easier. Is that okay?
Okay, no, no.
Let's put pencils down just for a second. Let's put pencils down just for a second. All right, who's get it now? All right, so you, first off, congratulations to you. You guys placed a ton of pins on the map. That's awesome because it's going to make this a lot easier. So we got to kind of count it up. We got to see where we're at because this is what we asked the community to do. We asked them to place pins to be able to meet those housing and employment numbers. And we also did this as a public kickoff. So what I'd like to do is make sure you leave these here because we're going to take pictures. This is hard work. But I want a couple folks, let's go through and generally, let's count up how many of these colors that we have, because I want to see how close or how much over we got in terms of what our growth targets are for this. So I need somebody, let's do a tally here. I'll get you a pen. Here's a pen. All right, so count your color and then mark it down, then we'll add it up. I'll take black. Monster. Neon monster. 13 on the lower. Go on to the survey, you click it in, it's essentially a budget. So you click one in, then you drop, you kind of count down to what you need. So the goal for this is if you place a ton of single family on large lots, it's going to take you forever to get there. And you're going to run out of space. So it's kind of, you know, it's accurate. Computer does all that for us. All right, so who's got a phone? You want to add? So what we need to do is multiply the number of dots by number of pins. You'll get a number. You have your number. All right. Like from the front of the line, from the front to red line here. Yeah. I in 3 and it took 20 minutes. So now I'm spoiled with the fry land. Yeah. That's the most convenient all out for everyone in terms of land use. 1,000. All right, you want to report out to the group? All right, let's do a quick report out for our. Attention up here. All right, so we did a quick count. Congratulations to you all. You put a lot of stuff on here. So our goal was 2,400 housing units and 2,400 new jobs. So number of spaces or pins on there for housing, we applied 17,318 housing units. So nice work. Needed 2,400. Right, now think about that. So we went a little over on housing. But when you think about jobs, so 2,400 jobs, we only went over, we were at 31. So much different, it's still over, which is great. But this is really consistent with what we saw at the high school, what we saw at the public kickoff, is that it's really easy to apply housing. It's really hard to apply employment. And that's going to be the challenge that we're going to face as a team, you as decision makers, but also as a community, is how do we start to think about both employment and housing to meet the targets, but also that meets the vision for the city. So just observations here. Rather than going to everybody individually, what do you all think about this, and what are you seeing on the board here? Who wants to start? Or what was challenging about it?
Yeah.
Yeah. A lot of stuff in the middle. But you notice you all gravitated to that. Look up at the map up there. That's where the community is gravitating towards. So it doesn't mean that we're going to apply that much growth, but you all focused right in that central spot as well too.
Well, I think if this side was all buildable land, basically, I think that they could be over there. Land, if we stuff a bunch of stuff into.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's all.
Other,
This is right on. Some of this is right on Safeway and everything. That's what I see here. And I think that's exciting because that's the same thing we saw at the first thing with the kickoff, because people thinking of something in a different way, instead of that looking like this. Say this is to me, this is a picture on here, it's plain commercial. And people say, wait, what we have, and I would like to do something different, because that's hard for people to do, to start envisioning it differently.
so still having those services, but it's something else. They're well with it. Other observations on the map. What was the hardest piece to place for somebody? Any way to push you a little bit in the outside city limits, inside urban growth there? What are the hardest pieces for folks to place?
Big apartment buildings where.
Yeah.
You think of all the impacts, it's not just.
Yeah. But also think about, that's true, but also in terms of, kind of diversity of housing types and affordability, it's not getting any cheaper anywhere. And so how do you start to manage, I use my daughter as an example, who's going away to college next year. She's not going to be able to afford a house. She's going to move into an apartment. And then if she's lucky, she's going to move to a condo or a townhome. So, and then
Pretty much we all.
yeah, so maybe she has kids or not, gets a house, but then she retires and she moves back into a townhome. So those types are, it's kind of stages of life and employment.
So I think that trying to follow.
$3 an hour job and not going.
But if we're talking about a lot of people wanting apartments, they don't want to be in an apartment that doesn't have anything to do around it. They want to be in an area that they can walk to recreation. I mean, meaning fun things to do, open spaces, community activity areas, shopping for food, and we don't have any of that. None of our apartments that we have created for people are that, because there are people who seek out those kind of cool apartment buildings that are being created. So this is our opportunity to make people want to move to an apartment because it's a cool one.
Well, that's why one of my ideas, Central School, has just been talked about forever. And the school district owns it.
Things that for townhouses and apartments on existing lots that already are small, that have actually pretty affordable houses or affordable rents in, an older home. You encourage that landowner then to tear down that historic home and put up a fourplex. And so now you've got 4 unaffordable units at $2,500 a month apiece instead of one affordable unit at $2,000 a month, which, yeah, it gets you more people, but we have competing needs we have to think about.
And also the vision is you want a beautiful town. That's part of it. And that's going to change. Look at our town, it's going to change how beautiful, colorful town. That's really because we don't that's just a concern.
Yeah. No, that's great. So I don't want to keep you too long tonight, but I did want to ask you one more question. So we placed a lot of housing, which is great. We placed a lot less employment. So what, that's gonna be a conversation that we'll continue to have thoughts, considerations, kind of issues, challenges when you start to think about those employment uses. We have a lot of industrial on the map. We have some commercial, actually less commercial than I was expecting, to be honest. So I'm just curious, kind of for folks who placed employment pins, talk about your process a little bit for that.
Unemployment is vitally important. For me, being so close to direct. When you can get it's definitely a priority to have those options. It might not be important, like your scenario, but it's important. Have to figure out.
Well,
Industrial park, I think we talked about industrial park. Is great opportunity. Jobs. You have capacity there. Great.
that 2018 survey is not right anymore. Is that what you're saying?
Correct. We have almost run out of the industrial land.
We usually vacant buildings or vacant land.
Vacant lots. When I walk through there, there is still vacant lots.
Yeah, there's quite a few vacant lots. Maybe if somebody has a plan for them.
They do?
They're spoken for, yes.
Oh, really?
Some of them are for expansions of existing businesses that are out there.
Plus, we zoned or allowed some large churches down there for that, taking up industrial business.
Right, we talked about that previously. Update.
So, as we won't answer this tonight, but it's something we'll need to consider as a group as we move forward. Other options is like there's employment uses, but then there's different scales and intensity of employment uses. So that's also going to be a question that we'll look at because, you are mostly built out. There's some vacant land, but it's really a lot of ways going to be about redevelopment, reorganization for some pieces. And so how do you think about that at a district level, at a corridor level? How do you start to accommodate? So this is why I think we met it, but we just barely met it compared to we way met it, for housing. So any other questions on this? This is super fun. Thank you for the time to go through this. Don't touch it. We're going to take pictures of it. In terms of next steps, so we're wrapping up the first phase, as Lance mentioned, in terms of public engagement. So we're planning on being back early fall to talk to you about scenarios. We've been charged by the school district to go back to the school district. So we'll have more public events. We'll definitely be engaging at a variety of different levels. We'll continue to evolve that, finding what's working or what's not working, and always make changes to make sure that we're as dynamic as possible for our outreach. And then as you'll start to see, we're at big picture now. We'll start to funnel that down. You'll start to see policies. We'll start talking about scenarios, outcomes, and eventually getting to our preferred recommended future land use. So it's all coming together. We have a lot of work to do in the next year or so, but this is the basis.
I did have one question. I
Yep.
know that they were saying that the survey had gotten extended because there wasn't a lot of people finishing it. What did the numbers come out to? How many people finished it? And how many people started it?
So it's through the end of the month. Right now, we have about 435 people who have clicked into the survey. And this is going to sound worse than it is, but we have about 135 who went through and clicked in. But if you notice on the dots, we have well over 1,000 points on the maps. So it's a complicated survey. And what we're seeing is people will do pieces of it. Like we'll get a lot of land use information, or people gravitate towards transportation, and they may not complete the whole survey, which is not unusual for something like this because, it's complicated. But I think, in terms of the depth and density of the information, the 430 people clicking into it and giving us information that's a good result for this. And every time somebody clicks something, it's saved. So you don't have to finish the
Oh,
survey.
that's great. I was gonna ask you about
Yeah.
that because I've been guilty of that. It's like, oh, this will only take a few minutes, and then you find out, oh, this is a really long survey.
Yeah, so as soon as you get into the question, every piece of data is automatically saved. So
That's
if you don't finish,
outstanding.
it doesn't mean you're losing the data.
Good.
It just means that maybe somebody didn't get through all the demographic stuff, or they didn't get through some of the pieces. Doesn't mean that we don't have all that information. But yeah, we have over 1,000 dots on the survey right now.
I'm just thinking, like, is there like, do we have any like little cards or whatever for the survey? 'Cause here's where my brain is, like, there's no age limit to it, right? So if it were pitched to like, maybe, is it okay for like teachers to talk with their students about it? Like, I'm just thinking about Park Place, Hidden River, I mean, they do surveys all the time. So I mean, just to maybe get that. I might send out the email blast.
What's the? Posted on there and noticed that.
Okay. I think I'll also put it on, I don't know if it was on the family page that's on Facebook, that's a good one. As a former office manager, not everyone reads those peach charts. But
That's right, peach jar.
but I think like definitely getting their perspective is gonna be. I'll send out an email blast tomorrow.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
And,
I'll do that tomorrow and like.
well, and we have three surveys total. So this is the first one.
Okay.
And this is great input because if we miss something, we'll make sure we expand, to get into the next survey, which will be going out with the scenarios, some preliminary policy discussion. That's where you really have to, this is kind of the fun stuff. That's the one where you really got to start making decisions. And so it'll be great to have more.
I didn't know the survey was still live. And I can do the same thing. I can put, I'm an administrator for Historic Monroe, which is our historical society group. And we trend toward older people. And we can just say, hey, make your voice be heard. Do you want to preserve some of our historic buildings and things like that? So I'll do that this week as
Yeah,
well.
I think
Maybe
maybe
we'll
I'll
capture
capture
some more people.
and then if we get a good feedback, then you can just pass off.
Point the lamp over there.
But no, I think if we all blast it, like, because that's a part of getting their voices, right? That's all a part of it, so.
Well, and that's why we extended it, because Lance and Anita and Kate are out there at all of the events right now. And so we wanted to, even if we just got another 20 or 30, it helps get it. And I think it's a dense survey, but we've gotten really good information out of it. So I feel comfortable with kind of what we've been seeing. It's
And
not
we can even
everybody.
say, hey, hang in there. We know it's a little long, but it's
Yeah.
really important information. We really appreciate it. So,
Yeah. Thank you so much. Do we need to close out or how do we?
I don't know, I was gonna ask, some folks that are home that are have a feeling that it's very difficult for them to follow. Because it's I don't know, hands-on, but was there anybody online have any comments? On what?
I was just saying for the folks that are online before we moved on, I know this was probably difficult to follow. This is, a really hands-on in the room kind of exercise, but I don't know if we just want to open up and if anybody had any comments or that they wanted to share before we close it up.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Me? Oh, okay. I was just wanted to make sure that the vacant track field on Kelsey is there stuff in that? We can't really hear you guys that well. At all, actually.
Yes, we did. We put a note for the memorial field there in
Cool.
this parks. Yeah. Anything else? Oh,
Go ahead, Liz.
So I was at an event, I was at the car wash for the your football league, and they have some interest in potentially buying the memorial field from the school district, and I recommended they talk to city council and they also talk to the school district. I realize it's owned by the school district, but I directed them to the school district and to city council to start that conversation. But I know a lot of people, that piece of land has, as we all know, historically been interesting, to say the least. So there's some interesting things that people would like to do with that land and to keep it fields. So if it's bought privately and kept as fields, you know, just something that came up when I was talking to community members. But yeah, and I did take the survey online while you guys were doing your work, and that I pushed out links to my private HOA website and encouraged. Because it seems like when Lance and I were talking about this at Juneteenth, that I wonder how much people in that North Kelsey corridor or the Kelsey corridor have been taking and giving feedback, because you know, it seems like a lot of people are complaining about the traffic congestion. So just some FYI. But anyways, so hopefully we can get some more surveys taken and get some more feedback and good information and stuff like that. So thanks.
Thank you.
There's no other comments, then we need to take a 5-minute break so that they can get pictures, because we have a need for an executive session after this. So we'll take 5 and be back in here for an executive session.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody.
And we need executive session should last about 5 minutes we're going with. All right. And then we will come back for any actions.
I know, but you can't see it. They can't see it. Council can't see what I'm showing. I'm screen sharing. And they can't see it.
Yeah. Yeah. Session. Yes, it is. So we need a motion for the.
We've been so well trained.
Yeah.
They're gonna make the motion first to add the item.
Go ahead.
Thank you. I move to add an item to the agenda regarding the acquisition of the Lindalo LLC property.
Second.
We have a motion by Councilmember Hanford and a second by Councilmember Fulcher. The motion is to move to add an item to the agenda regarding the acquisition of Lindalo LLC property. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Ayes have it. We have another motion up there.
Do you want me to present the material first? and then you
Oh,
can-
that's right. Sorry. Gonna present the
Okay.
information. Go ahead.
Yes. All right, hopefully you can all hear me now. Thank you. So the council has been provided with a proposed purchase and sale agreement to acquire the property located at 110 North Blakely Street and owned by the Lindalo LLC. The purchase and sale agreement tracks the core deal points that were set forth in the previously approved letter of intent for this transaction. And the main contract provisions are as follows. The offer price and purchase and sale agreement are $500,000. There's an earnest money deposit of $15,000, a review period of 90 days, and a due diligence period, which includes title, survey, phase one environmental inspection, and land entitlements. The purchaser will, or excuse me, the seller will keep some personal property, and the commission will pay, the buyer's broker will be paid by the seller. And those are the main deal points outlined in the purchase and sale agreement in front of the council this evening. And we are looking for a motion to authorize the mayor to sign the purchase and sale agreement with Lindalo LLC as seller.
Do we have a motion? Councilmember Hanford.
Yes, I move to authorize the mayor to sign the purchase and sale agreement with Lindalo LLC as seller and the city of Monroe as buyer for real property identified by tax parcel number 005174019000901.
Any seconds?
Can you second?
So the motion by Councilmember Hanford and seconded by Councilmember Kinney. All in favor, say aye. Aye. All opposed? Again, the ayes have it. Any other business today? That's it? Without any,
Second.
all in favor? Say
Aye.
Aye. Aye. We are adjourned. Thank you very much.
Good job, Captain.
Good job, Captain.